We guys are holding on today's daf. We're already further down, so we're way ahead. We're on Lamed Amid Aleph at the Mishnah. 38-2 at the Mishnah. All right, here we go. Ein odom nichnas la'azara la'avoida. A person shall not enter the azara, the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, for an avoida. Afilu tahar, even if he's tahar, ad sheyitpol, until he goes to the mikvah. Rashi jumps on this right away and says, lav dafka avoida. The word avoida, to do a service, is not exact. The ein odom nichnas la'azara ad shetibol umetama mefarish b'gemara, because no person goes into the azara. No person goes into the azara without going to the mikvah, and that would include a kohen and a non-kohen, whether they're doing an avodah or whether they're not doing avodah. So the wording is a little inexact. Goes the Mishnah further. On Yom Kippur, now we go back to Yom Kippur. Chamesh tefilos, 5 tefilos, v'asara kiddushin, and 10 kiddushins, meaning sanctifications of washing his hands and his feet. Washing the hands and the feet are called sanctifications. Toivul Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Gadol was Toivul on Kohen Gadol, Mekadesh Boy B'Yom on Yom Kippur. Okay? The Kulam, and all of them, Mekadesh Al Beis HaParva. And all of these immersions were done in the holy, on top of the Parva, the chamber. If you remember, we had a machlokes about 10 dafim back, where in the Azara was the Beis HaParva, whether it was in the north, in the 4 boxes in the north, if you remember, boxes number 37, 38, 39, 40, or in the south, and we determined that it was in the south near the Mizbeach. As it were, the room was built inwards, in towards, from the wall into the Azara, and on top of it there was stairs leading to the top of it, upon which there was a mikvah. Okay, Chutz, says the Gemara, all of these that needed to be done in Yom Kippur, this was the mikveh that was done. Chutz mizu bilvad, except for this first going to the mikveh, which was ein odom nichnas la'azara afilu b'tar ad shitiyeh yitpol. Since every day of the year, everybody who wanted to go into the Azara needed to go use a mikveh. So they didn't use the mikveh that was already in the Azara on top of the Beis HaParva. Instead, they used a different mikveh that was obviously outside the Azara, and that they went ahead and they toveled there, because every day, anyone who goes into, it's a universal rule. Anybody who has to go into the Azara, it's got nothing to do with Yom Kippur, automatically has to go into the mikveh. Says the Gemara Vaita, says the Mishnah further, Parsu Sodin Shel Butz Beinoi Lebein, and they would spread a linen sheet between him and the people. In other words, there was a certain amount of privacy that was given to the Kohen Gadol. And in fact, today, by the Hasidim, when the Rebbe goes to the mikveh, none of the other Hasidim are in the mikveh at the time that the Rebbe goes to the mikveh. And now we're beginning to see where that idea comes from. We skipped the last 3 words. Okay? Just take out the last 2 words of the Mishnah that are in parentheses. Says the Gemara. We are now on 38-3. The bottom of Lamed Amid Aleph. Shalu es Ben Zayma. They asked Ben Zayma, Tavi lezu lama. Why does the Kohen need to do this tefillah every morning before he enters into the Beis Hamikdash if he's tahar already? The Kohen is tahar. So what is this extra that the Mishnah starts off? Ein Adam Nichnas Lazara Afilu Tar Ad Shetibo. Well, why? If he's Tar already, there's no need for this tefillah. So what's the reason? Amalahen, because it says like this: Uma hamishana mikodesh lekodesh. With regard to Yom Kippur, whenever the kohen switches from one holy place to another holy place, from the heichal to the kodesh hakedoshim, and from the kodesh hakedoshim to the heichal, ubimakim sha'anus karis lamakim sha'anus karis, and from one place that the place is karis to another place is karis. That means if a person is tamei, contaminated, and the person would be found there, there would be chayiv karis, i.e., the heichal and the kodesh hakedoshim. So when he moves from the heichal to the kodesh hakedoshim, when he moves from the kodesh hakedoshim to the heichal, Toyin Tevilah, the Kohen Gadol requires immersion, which is the explanation for all those 5 Tevilas and those 10 washing of the hands and the feet on Yom Kippur. Therefore, says the Gemara, a perfect Kal V'Chayma, Hamishana Mechol L'Kodesh, somebody that moves from non-sacred, that means his regular home, he's coming from outside the Beis HaMikdash, and coming into the Azara of the Beis HaMikdash. So he's coming from the Chol, from the non-sacred, to the sacred. Umimakim she'en onus kares, which is his home, a place where, of course, being there betamei, if he's contaminated, if he's in his own home, there's no problem. Umimakim she'onus kares, to a place that is so holy that he would be chayav kares if he went there in a state of contamination. Is it not logical? Is it not a straight out Kal V'Chayma fortuity argument that he should also require immersion? And that's the reason why. Even if the kohen is tahar, he still has to tovel before he comes into the Beis HaMikdash, which again is another explanation why the Hasidim go to the mikvah before coming into shul. Same principle. We're all tumah meis, and we're all tamei. It doesn't matter. It's the idea behind it that they're trying to copy. Rabbi Yehuda argues and says, no, serach tevila huzu. This is merely a reminder immersion. That means it's only a rabbinical decree, so that one will recall and say, oops, I have a tumah on me, and I should not go into the Beis HaMikdash. Look at the bottom Rashi. The bottom Rashi on the page. Serach tefilu hizu. Ein kan chayva min ha-Torah. You're right. If somebody is tar, says Rabbi Yehuda, min ha-Torah, you don't need a tefillah. You're tar. Elo l'sarach u'liptosh b'shem tefillah kedei lahalois alev. In other words, to rise on his heart. Shein tefillah elo l'tameim. That the only reason why we do tefillah is for people who are tamei. And he'll put on his heart that he might have a tumah, v'yiska tumah, yishenel. Remember an old tumah that he never took care of, yeshalom, v'shachach, and then he forgot. V'yifresh milibo la'azara hayoim ad shi'arav shimshon, achar atfilu lo yavir hayoim. And therefore he'll separate himself from the azara until he goes to the mikvah and then waits for harav shemesh. He waits for the nighttime, and then he will do the avodah the next day. It turns out, therefore, that it seems to be saying that according to Ben Zoma, the tefillah that they have to do, even though they're tar before they come into the Azara, is midiaraisa, is biblical in nature, because he has a Kal V'Chayma, and a Kal V'Chayma is a way of learning out a diaraisa din. Masha'e came, Rabbi Yehuda seems to be clearly saying it's only rabbinical in nature. Jerry, are you still there? I just want to make sure. Jerry, I'm assuming you're still there because
I'm here.
Very good. Okay, because I can't hear you. But okay, so my kamafligi, and what is Bezaim and Rabbi Yehuda disagree? And now we're on Amid Beis. Lamed Amid Beis. Lamed Amid Beis. What? We're good?
That's great.
Okay,
We're on Amid Beis.
We're ready on Amid Beis. Yeah, we're getting ahead today. Today we're going to have a shortened version. They're arguing whether an invalidation of the service when the kohen comes in, he's tahar, he's pure, and he forgets to go to the mikvah, and he goes into the bezar and he does the avodah, he does the service. Is the avodah de facto defective or not? It's no good because he says that in fact it's a diaraisa. Look at the second Rashi on the top line, Leben Zoima, the Oma diaraisi, who says this going to the mikveh is a diaraisa. Shaharei, this is the reason why I'm pointing this out. Shaharei niten kal v'chomer liyidrish. Since he used a kal v'chomer, he said, Ma Dr. Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, when he goes from holy to holy and from makom to makom, that's chayiv kares, needs to be toivel. That certainly when you go from a place that's non-sacred to a place that's holy, and from a place that's not chayiv kares to a place that's chayiv kares like kolshkein. So he used the kal v'chomer, noisen kal v'chomer liyidrish, habi avodah say mechaleles, the avodah is no good. From here you see that a kal v'chomer is a biblical idea. It's built into the system of the Torah that where I could use my, like we call the grubber finger, the thumb, and you can say, if this is like this, so this is surely like that, that is biblical in nature, at least according to Ben Zoma. So, Ben Zoma says, therefore, since it's biblical in nature, you need to do the tefillah, even if you're tahar. And if you didn't, therefore your avodah is no good. Rabbi Yehuda, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, lo meichel avodah. You did not, the avodah is still good. You didn't mess up the avodah. Because this tefillah is only rabbinical in nature, so that you should remind yourself in case you had an old tumah that you didn't take care of. So straight to Gemara, the Ben Zoma may machol, but according to Ben Zoma, are you really telling me that this is a diaraisa, this tefillah, and it messes up the avodah? Tanya, we learned in a brisa just the opposite. We learned in a brisa that it's not koyin gadol shaloi tov avaloi kiddush on Yom Kippur. If a koyin gadol did not immerse himself or did not sanctify his hands and his feet, he didn't wash his hands and his feet, ben beged lebeged, when he was transitioning from the gold vestments on the outside of the Eichel to the white vestments in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or the white vestments from the Kodesh HaKadoshim to the gold vestments in the Eichel, ubein avodah la'avodah, or from one service and another service, another location, avodah keshera. The avodah is kosher. Right away, everybody, we should already see the problem, right? You see, there goes your kal v'chomer. There blows up your kal v'chomer. Because lichatchila, you have to do the tefillah, but you see that even without the tefillah, what are we saying over here? That de facto the avodah is good on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, if he didn't do it. But let's keep going with the brisa. Now, however, echad koyin gadol ve'echad koyin hedyet shaloi kiddush yoda b'raglav shachris who did not sanctify his hands or feet in the morning, that means he did not wash his hands and feet at all that day, whether it's Yom Kippur or whether it's any other day. That means 365 days a year. He didn't start off the day by washing Na'al Natilas Yadayim, like we do in the morning. If he doesn't do Negel Vaser, if he doesn't wash his hands in the morning, then he does the Avodah Psula, then the Avodah is possible, is invalid. But you see from over here that failing to go to the mikvah, or failing to be Mekadosh, in the middle of the Avodah, after he watched Negel Vaser, but during the Avodah, when he was moving between the Kodesh HaKadoshim and the Heichal, and when he was switching his clothing from white to gold to white, etc., or do different Avodas, the ever de facto it's good. So what is Ben Zayma saying over here? That it would be Meichel Avodah, that it would, what do you call, make the Avodah no good if he does not go ahead and go to the mikvah before he does the Avodah when he's tahar. So it says the Gemara, you're right. So now we got to go. Let's look at this differently.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
So here we're talking about real avodas.
Yes.
But in the Mishnah, as Rashi pointed out, it says Adam Nichlas Lazar Avoda. The avoda there was not really meant as an avoda. It's like entrance.
Correct.
So
in other words,
we're making all these arguments about this thing which is really avoda, but we're quoting all these things which were avoda.
And the answer for that is because of Ben Zayma. Since Ben Zayma hinged everything on the Kal V'Chayma, and we're saying, and where does that Kal V'Chayma start? With the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. So therefore, but you're absolutely correct. The reality, of course, is that anybody who goes into the Azara requires the mikvah. The argument merely is to use the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur to bring the proof that it is biblical in nature. So therefore, that's why we keep hinging on that point. Correct, but you're right. But you're right in reality. And so says the Gemara, they're actually arguing whether somebody who fails to immerse himself in the mikvah before going into the Azara is guilty of being over on a mitzvah saseh, on a positive commandment of the Torah. Ben Zayma kavi ba'aseh. According to Ben Zayma, he is without question in the aseh. By admitting the immersion, he's an essay. Since the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, let me repeat that, Charlie. Since the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur violates a positive commandment by admitting an immersion on Yom Kippur, so therefore somebody who fails to immerse himself before entering the Beis Hamikdash on any day of the year is likewise guilty of violating the commandment of the Bittul Aseh. If you want to see that clearly, instead of going into Rashi, look at number 9 in the Art Scroll. Number 9 in the Art Scroll. And the idea again, but I want to make a point because your question was an excellent question. The answer is everything keeps rolling back. Everything keeps rolling back to bring proof from whatever was going on with the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. That's why we focus on the Avodah and etc. But Eina Chanami, it's anybody that comes into the Azara. That doesn't change that overarching fact. It's just the proof of whether it's a D'Oraisa, biblical or rabbinical, that we're going to argue with it. So here, Ben Zayma seems to say you're on a positive command. The Rabbi Yehuda loy koyeba say because it's only rabbinical, so there's no positive command. So says the Gemara. Umi Islay the Rabbi Yehuda high svara, but does Rabbi Yehuda really say this? That anybody who enters the Beis Hamikdash has to table himself rabbinically, he has to go to the mikvah. The Tanya we learned mitzayra tovel on the last. Let me just Tanya. Just give me a second. The Tanya we learned Mitzayra Toivel on the last day of someone who's a Mitzayra has to go 7 days, and then, or on the last day, he Toivels on his end of his 7th day, and then in the morning of the 8th day, when he has to bring his kabbanis, he has to Toivel again. So he has 2 tevilas, a tevila on the end of the 7th day, and a tefillah in the morning of the 8th day before he comes into the Beis Hamikdash to bring his kabbanis and have the blood sprayed on him. So it goes like this. Vatagya, Mitzayra Toivel, on the last day of his purity, the Mitzayra Toivels himself in the mikvah. And then the Omad Bishar Nicanor, and then stands at the Nicanor gate, which if you looked at the picture, separates the Ezras Noshim from the big regular Azara. Rabbi Yehuda ain't Tzarech Tefillah, Shekavar Tarvul Me'erev. He doesn't require the second Tefillah because he already immersed himself at the end of the 7th day. In this Baraisa, Rabbi Yehuda clearly says that one does not have to Taivel himself before he enters into the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Gemara, Ahu Diktanatama. This is not difficult because it teaches the reason. Shikvar Tavu Me'erev. The reason is because he was Taivel already the night of the, what do you call it? He did a tefillah at the end of his 7 clean days, right at the 7 days. But a regular person who hasn't gone to tefillah the night before has to go to the mikveh in the morning before he walks into the Beis Hamikdash. Midrabanan. And says the Gemara, and for the one who's involved with the second Baraisa, the one who said that challenged it before, Mike Korele, what does it become? In other words, this explanation that recalls Rabbi Yehuda's 2 rulings is stated explicitly in that Baraisa. So in other words, what was he bothered about? Because he wanted to use, there's a third Baraisa that needs to be accounted for. The Baraisa says like this: the room that's called the Lishchas HaMitzrayim, if you picture in your head the Ezras Noshim, give me 1 second, I gotta plug in my computer before I lose Charlie over here. Hold on, forgot about that. Hold on. Give me a second. Of course, now it's all tangled up. I apologize. A second, here we go. Let's just get this done. There we go. Here we go. Okay. All right, there we go. Charlie, I'm not going to lose you. If you look back at the picture, all the way at the beginning, you will see that in the Ezras Noshim, there are 4 big boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4. To be exact, I'm going to try to find the picture myself. Give me a second here. Of course, I cannot find it when I need it. Here we go. Okay. Give me 1 second. We are talking about the north
Number 12.
corner. It looks up here. You can't see it. You can't see it, Jerry, but it's in the Ezra Noshim. Right, but it's in the front of. It's in front of the Gemara. In the front of the Gemara before Daf Beis. If you leap back there, you will see it. It's number 12. Exactly. Jerry can't see it because he's on the phone, but it's number 12. Okay? So, Lishchas HaMitzayrim. Why was that room called the Lishchas HaMitzayrim? Shesham Mitzayrim Tovlin. Because there the Mitzayris would tovel themselves in the mikvah before coming out the door. If you look by number 18 over there, okay? Number 18. This is the Leishlis Klei Asher, the storage store, right around over there. They would stick their hands out the door, okay? They would stick their hands out the door because there the Mitzayris would come before sticking their thumbs and toes into the Azara proper and getting it sprayed with blood. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Loi Mitzayrim Bilvad Amru. The truth is not just Mitzayrim would toivel over there in the Lishchas HaMitzayrim, of which there was a mikvah. Ella, Kol Adam, we're now on 30b2. Rather, all people immerse themselves before entering the courtyard, the actual Azara, They walked into the Ezes Noshim, they walked into the Lishches HaMitzorin, and they used the mikvah. So this Baraisa clearly contradicts the previous one, because here Rabbi Yehuda says you have to use the mikvah before going into the Azara, and the previous one said you do not have to. Rabbi Yehuda ain't tzarich tefillah shekvar tovul be'erev, and then it says over there another, and the first prices seem to have said that you do not have to. So says the Gemara loy kasha. The tovul. The second baraisa is where the Mitzvah already immersed himself in the night before, so he doesn't need to immerse himself in the morning. The loy tovul. This third baraisa is where he didn't tovul himself the night before, so now he has to use what he called the mikvah. Says the Gemara, idoloi tovil. Great question. If he was not tovil, so now he's toveling himself on the eighth day. How could he get back? How could he stick his toes and thumbs into the Azara? Harib Shemis body. He requires waiting until the nighttime. Right? The rule is whenever you tovel, you got to wait until nighttime. So that means on the 8th day, when he goes out and tovels, he should have to wait until the night of the 9th. Says the Gemara. The Gemara says, good question. So let's figure it. Let me change the situation again. Ella aidi the tovel. The both Bryce is talking about where the Mitzvah was tovel on the 7th day. Ha da asach date. But in the third Baraisa, he diverted his attention. After he toveled, he didn't concentrate. He didn't guard himself against further tumult. So therefore, he has to immerse himself again. And the other one, he kept attention. He didn't lose attention. So therefore, he doesn't have to tovel again. Right? The Gemara, but if he diverted attention, the rule is that we would have to wait that it became tamei, and he would require another 7 clean days, and to be sprayed with the mechatas, the ash water from the paraduma on the 3rd and the 7th, right? The Amar Abdistai Bar Mosul, Amar Ab Yochanan, Hesech Das Tzarech Hazor Shlishi Ushli. So that can't be the answer, just because what it could be was Hesech Das from the nighttime. You want to tell me he would be tovel in the morning and he could stick his thumbs in and toes into the base of English? No, he can't. Ella, I did the lawyers of that. He says, you're right. Both cases are where he did not divert his attention. He kept his attention. The law kasha. The tovel al das bias migdash. The second Bryce is saying that he was told at the end of the 7th day to the Beis Hamikdash the next morning. There he only told only to become purified, but he didn't have in mind to go into the Beis Hamikdash. The Iba is saying, I'll give you another answer. Tani, we can learn that Yehuda is saying in the third Bryce, Loi mitzarim noimrum elokol adam, that he was, in fact, the third Bryce is not talking about the Mitzvah. He's talking about all other people. Anybody else who wants to go into the courtyard requires, meaning tefillah, in order to march into the Azara, according to Rabbi Yehuda, rabbinically speaking. Ravina Omar, Ravina says, Rabbi Yehuda l'devrayim v'rabbanon the Rabbanon kamalu. Rabbi Yehuda in the third Baraisa is talking in the words of the Tanna Kamma. He's saying as follows: Lididi, to me, Mitzvah ain't tzarich tefillah. The Mitzvah does not require immersion because he already immersed on the 7th day, and I say the whole thing is only rabbinically speaking. Lididi, but according to you, Tanna Kamma, that everybody requires it, biblically speaking. Oiduli azimiya, submit to me at least. The loy mitzurim bevad amru ela kol adam. That it's not just Mitzrayim, but everybody requires immersion before entering the courtyard.
Where you holding the
Daddy, we're holding at the bottom of 30B2. 30B. Yeah, 30B2.
Lamed
Lamed Amid Beis, Lamed Amid Beis,
Yeah.
Lamed Amid Beis, 30b2. V'Rabbanon, and the Rabbanon say, Mitzayra doyesh b'tumah. A Mitzayra is steeped in Tomei. The definition of a Mitzayra is somebody who's intrinsically Tomei. So therefore, he needs a new tefillah. He needs a new tefillah because since the Mitzayra was tummy for a period of time, he becomes used to touching tummy objects because people are people. When you're tummy, you're not as careful to stay away from other tummy things because you say, "I'm already tummy. What's the difference if I touch tummy things?" So therefore, we need an extra insurance policy. So even though he titled that night, we want him titling again. All other people are not currently steeped in tumah, and they do not need to immerse themselves. If an ordinary person knows that he's tar, he doesn't have to go to the mikveh before entering the azara, because there's no reason to think that he unwittingly became tameh. So it comes out there that the Tanakama of the Beraisa is arguing on our Mishnah because our Mishnah clearly starts off, Ein Adam Nichnas La'azara Afilu Tar Achi Yitpo, which we said is therefore like Ben Zoma, that Midia Raisa, you have to be Taibo. Very good. So, we have another about 10 minutes. Amalei Abai le Rabbi Yosef, says Abai to Rabbi Yosef, name a Rabbanon the Pligil the Rabbi Yehuda. Should we therefore say that the Rabbanon that are arguing on Rabbi Yehuda? We are now on 30b3. 30b3. In other words, in the second Baraisa, and they say and require that the Mitzayra does have to do a second mikvah. That means just because he was toivel on the end of the seventh day at night, he still requires a tevilah in the morning of the eighth before he sticks his toes and thumbs from the lishchas hamitzayra into the azara by the Nicanor gate. Kiben zayma smiru. If therefore they must be holding like Ben Zayma, that says it's a diaraisa dikadin. It is a biblical requirement to toivel before you go into the mikvah based upon the kal v'chayma. And again, I point out the second Rashi on top. Let's just say it again because it's so vital, it's so fundamental. The Amma diaraisa sharei nitan kal v'chayma liyidrish ahu avoidasay mechayleles, because a kal v'chaymer. Because remember, Ben Zayma said, just like the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, when he goes from the Holy of Holies into the Holy, from the Kodesh HaKadoshim to the Heichel, from the Heichel to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and when he switches from the white begotten to non-white begotten to the gold begotten, back and forth, he has to be toivel. That certainly somebody coming from his house, which is Chol, and which he's allowed to stand in his house while Tomei is now coming into the holy, and where he's not allowed to stand and be tamei, it certainly needs tefillah. And from there we say that kal v'chayma is a diaraisa kal v'chayma. So that's very important in Shas, that when we use a kal v'chayma, it's not simply a logic. There is a shita that holds, Ben Zayma holds that a kal v'chayma is a diaraisa, is a biblical logic. Even though it doesn't say it straight out, the Torah is saying, use your head. I don't have to put everything down in writing. You can use your head. If I, the Rebbe, put it this way in the Torah, it's because you were supposed to take it to its logical conclusion. I'm not going to spoon feed you entirely, right? So Ben Zaymer Sviruhu, V'hai Diktani Mitzayra, and this that the Baraisa taught. Their machlokes in the case of Mitzayra is only Leidicha Koichai de Rabbi Yehuda, to teach us the Koich of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the Tefillah is only the Rabbanon, and a Mitzayra that tovels at the night of the seventh does not have to tovel again in the morning of the eighth. It means I hold it's a Diaraisa, and Rabbi Yehuda says not only is it rabbinical, But it's so rabbinical that in fact, if I toivel on the night of the 7th, I don't have to toivel on the 8th in the morning. Or duma or not, shani mitzayra the yayish b'tuma. A mitzayra is different because it's steeped in tumah. So he's been busy with tumah all these days, so his mind is not as careful to stay away from tumah now that he's already toiveled. So the Rabbanim of the second Baraisa stated the halacha that you have to toivel again on the morning of the 8th, only with regard to a mitzayra. But in fact, every other person, if they know for sure they're tahor, do not have to toivel when they come to the Beis Hamikdash. And says the Gemara, that's exactly right. Amalei shani mitzayra the doyish b'tumah. Mitzayra is different because he's steeped in tameh. So his mind, people are creatures of habit. That's a reality. That's the reason why we say it's called a drug habit, or mitzvah gereres mitzvah, avera gereres avera. A mitzvah turns into a mitzvah, an avera goes to an avera, because people are creatures of habit. That's the whole thing. To break a habit is probably the hardest thing for a human being to do. What makes tshuva so hard is that we are creatures of habit. We're so much creatures of habit that more often than not, we'll park in the same parking spots. We'll walk to shul exactly the same way. We don't even realize how habitual our behaviors are. So here he's saying the mitzayra because he was a mitzayra for so long, at least 7 days, he stopped being careful about tahar. Here we're going to worry about the Rabbanan are going to worry and say you have to toivel the morning, even if you toivel at night on the 7th, you have to toivel again in the morning of the 8th. But a regular person who comes into the Azara, who knows that he's tar and he has no reason to think that he unwittingly became tameh, does not have to toivel in the mikveh coming in. Obviously not like our Mishnah, which says you have to. Okay, let's go a little further. Let me just give me a second. We're going to go just a little further. Amalei Abai Rav Yosef says Abai to Rav Yosef, Ul-Rab Yehuda the Amas Serech Tevila Huzu. According to you in our Mishnah, it says that it's all rabbinical. It's only a reminder to wake somebody up that he might have an old tumah that he never took care of. We're on tomorrow's daf, Lamed Aleph, Amid Aleph, 31a1. So now the question comes, Choitzis, does an external object interpose between the person's body and the mikveh, or Eino Choitzis, or does not interpose? Because on a biblical immersion, so for an example, a woman, after her days of nida, has to go to the mikveh. She's not allowed to have anything on her body. So if she has a Band-Aid, she has to take the Band-Aid off. If she has earrings, she has to take the earrings off because the water has to go into the holes of her ears.
Even
to put this
hair.
I was about to get that. Right, so I'm about to get to that. 2 hairs. 1 hair is not a problem. 2 hairs is a problem. But if there's a knot in the hair, it becomes problematic. To take this so further, and Jerry, is anybody listening to the rest of this? We're a little private.
I'm here.
Okay, Bukharians make their women shave off their hair completely down south. They do not have any pubic hair. Bukharians take this to the nth degree and say, since that hair is naturally curly, that hair has to be taken off. Otherwise, you cannot toivel in the mikveh. The Hasidim, it is very possible, as you know, that some Hasidim, it's not even Hasidish, it actually was Ashkenazish. It was actually from the Chassam Sofer, the holy Chassam Sofer, who said that women have to shave their hair when they get married. The logic probably behind it was that in the small Darflach, in the small towns where there were no mikvahs, and the women had to use the river and the lake to toivel, and it was being done in the middle of the night with their husband watching to make sure they weren't raped or worse. right? It was probably impossible, and at a time when lice was prevalent, it probably was required. That's probably why the Chassam Sofer said to take it off. The Zohar HaKadosh mentioned something too as well. But anyways, so that's the question over here. With regard to the mikvah, now Rabbi Yehuda that says going to the mikveh in the Beis Hamikdash before going into the Beis Hamikdash is only rabbinical in nature. So what happens if this woman has a bandage on? Is it or this guy has a bandage on? Is it a problem? Since it's only rabbinical, is it a problem? And he has to go table again or not? Amalei, says the Gemara. Amalei. Rabbi Yosef said to Abayim, call the tikkun rabbanon ke'ein di'araisa tikkun. So therefore, it has the same laws as a biblical immersion, and therefore there is rules of chatzitza, and the tefillah is no good. Amalei Abayim, one more. Here we're going to go. Let me see. Let's go. Amalei Abayim Rabbi Yosef bia miksasa shema bia eloi is a partial entry into the Azara, considered an entry that you require a rabbinical immersion or not. In other words, you're not going all the way in. Amalei, and where did this point out? The Mitzayra. The Mitzayra has a thumb and a toe that's stuck into the Azara. He stands outside and he puts his thumb and his toe into the Azara and gets blood dipped on it. So the question is, does that require a immersion? The thumbs of the Mitzayra will prove that the immersion is necessary, even for only a partial entry. Shabaya b'mixas, because they are only a partial entry into the courtyard, because only the toe and the thumb get stuck into the courtyard. But Tanya, Mitzayra Toiva, the Mitzayra first immerses himself, and then Now the only problem with this answer is, how can you bring proof from a Mitzayra to all cases that a partial entry is an entry? We just said before, what did we just say before about Mitzayras? Shani Mitzayra Didayesh B'Tumah. A Mitzayra is different because he's steeped in Tameh. So we're more chomer when it comes to a Mitzayra. You can't bring a raya from here to all other cases of a regular person who's a Mitzasa. So the truth of the matter is, I'm not 100% sure what Rabbi Yosef's raya is to Abaya. I thought of this question yesterday, and I really don't yet have a clear answer in my head of this answer of Rabbi Yosef. One more. We're going to go, and then we're going to stop.
What do you mean? He put in the Bahamas. He's blessed to do tefillah. He has to. So it's a riot.
Yes,
it's a riot
to a Mitzayra. It's a riot to a Mitzayra. Who said it's a riot to every other Jew, every other Kohen, that if a partial entry requires a tefillah? Maybe Dafka a Kohen, a Mitzayra, because he's Dayish B'Tumah. You understand what I'm asking? The Gemara before said it. Dayish B'Tumah is different. We're more strict. So I'm not 100% sure. Anyways, one more thing.
I'll bring you a raya from someplace else. Yeah?
Daddy, let me get to the tape. All right. Yeah, but Daddy, let me get to the take because it's getting late. And then we'll deal with it. The guy makes, yeah, I know. I just want to get to the take over here. What's the law regarding one fashioning a long knife and slaughtering something in the courtyard while he's standing outside in the Ezras Noshim? So he has this huge 2-foot long knife that he uses to stand outside in the Ezras Noshim, and he slaughters inside the Azara. Does he require tefillah or not? Says the Gemara, Tiboy Leila ben Zayma, Tiboy Leila Rabbana, the Pligi Leila Rabbi Yehuda. Tiboy Leila ben Zayma, who said it's a diaraisa, Rabbi Ben Zoma says you have to immerse only when a person is actually inside the Azara. But when he's standing outside, even though he's putting a knife inside the courtyard and slaughtering and doing the shechita inside, since he's standing outside, he doesn't have to tovel. Since he's doing an avodah inside, he might get pulled towards the inside of the Azara, and so therefore he should go tovel. The Rabbanim said that a non-mitzvah, someone who's not a mitzvah, does not he's doing the shechita, they would say, no, you have to go immerse. You don't have to, because they never require the immersion of a Torah person when they say you have to go in. And says the Gemara, Teiku, we're going to leave this question unresolved. And this is where we're stopping at the two dots, Chamesh Tevilas.